All rise. Please be seated.
Ready for the jury?
Yes, sir.
All right, bring them on.
Your Honor, regarding, this will check that, our proposed charges, would it be okay if we email them to you after we finish court today?
Yes. After, typically after all the witnesses, and so whenever that is, yeah. I like to review them in advance, but we'll talk about them. All right.
All jurors present, Your Honor.
All right, very good. Next witness.
Do you swear affirm the testimony you shall give the court and the jury in the trial of this case to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God? Yes, I do. Thank you, sir. Please state your first and last name. What's my last name? Phonetically, leave it.
Walter Humphreys, Humpphries. Good afternoon, sir.
Your uniform tells us a lot of things about you. One is you're a North Charleston police officer.
Yes, sir.
Two is that you are a lieutenant.
Yes, sir.
Gives us your name. And it tells us you're also a member of the SWAT team.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And what is the other
Oh,
insignia there?
we refer to it as a tactical eagle. And for our department, it represents 10 consecutive years on SWAT.
And let's go back to, you were born in Florida, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then as a child moved up to Maryland?
Correct.
Why don't you take us from high school on to your law enforcement career? So fill in the blanks between high school and law enforcement.
Yes, sir. I graduated high school at Shenandoah Valley Academy. It's a boarding school in Newmarket, Virginia. From there, I attended Towson State University in Baltimore, Maryland for 1 year. I then joined the Marine Corps, where I spent 4 years. Upon getting out of the Marine Corps in 1996, I went to work for the Charleston County Sheriff's Office as a detention officer in the jail on Leeds Avenue.
Well, let's slow it down.
Okay.
And in the Marine Corps, how old were you when you entered the Marine Corps?
21.
And in the Marine Corps, what was your, everybody in the Marines infantry, is that correct?
Everybody's a rifleman, sir.
Rifleman, sorry. What was your other training in?
It was infantry. It's 0311 is the code for it. That was my primary, what they call MOS, military occupational specialty, was infantry. I had a secondary assignment of security forces, which that's what actually brought me to Charleston.
Sorry, secondary assignment of?
Security forces.
So Lieutenant, you still got a little Maryland in you. If we could
Fast.
slow it down.
Yes, sir.
United States Marine Corps, 4 years, rifleman, infantry, secondary MOS was security forces. Security forces means what to the layman?
They're assigned to guard special weapons, nuclear weapons and things of that nature. That's actually what brought me here to Charleston.
And why was that? What was your capacity coming to Charleston?
Under security forces to guard the special weapons over there on the weapons station when they were here at that time.
And did you get discharged from the Marine Corps?
Yes, sir. I was honorably discharged in 1996.
How many years were you in?
4 years.
So we're about 24, 25 at this point?
Yes, sir.
What did you do then?
I went to work for the Charleston County Sheriff's Office as a detention officer on Leeds Avenue.
And that's where you just work in one building, be stationary for a full shift and go home?
Yes, sir. Myself and another detention officer would be responsible for what they refer to as a housing unit, where the particular assignments I had was roughly about 130 inmates at the time, 112 to 130 inmates.
And you were actually in the unit with them?
Yes, sir.
And did you eventually go to another position?
I did. While still at the sheriff's office, I went and became a dispatcher and 911 operator. I did that for roughly a year.
And at that time, you received phone calls, radio calls and whatnot, and then dispatched appropriate first responders?
Yes, sir. It was multitasking. I answered 911 calls and were responsible for the radio for deputies in their traffic.
Did you eventually leave that job?
Yes, sir, I did.
And where did you go?
That's when I went to work for the North Charleston Police Department. By this time, it was 1999.
And how old were you at that time?
Roughly about 27, I believe, 28.
And tell us about, did you go to school? Were you trained before you were certified as a police officer?
I went to the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy, the standard police training.
And how long were you there?
I believe it was 12 weeks.
And after the formal training at the academy, did you have subsequent training at North Charleston?
There's been annual recertification training, which is required by the state to maintain certifications.
Or did you have what's been referred to as FTO training?
Yes, sir.
Would you tell us what that is?
You're assigned to an officer. The North Charleston Police Department has designated officers, considered training officers, not just any officer. They themselves go through special training on how to train people. You're assigned to that officer for a set amount of time. I don't recall off the top of my head how many weeks it is, but it's probably roughly 4 weeks or 9 weeks, 8 weeks or 9 weeks. You're with this training officer, and more or less you're a two-man unit, and they'll start that training off kind of showing you how to do stuff and slowly wean you into being the sole officer and there to kind of watch over you to make sure you're doing things right before you're actually out there on your own.
If you're familiar, Do you know if they're written up every day, the things you did right, the things you did wrong?
Yes, sir. There's what they're called a daily observation report, completed daily by the FTO.
And at the end of your field training, 8 or 9 weeks, whatever that time is it you move on to the next position, or do you give remedial training?
Usually, that's all the training required to be cut loose, so they call it, on your own, to be a solo officer. So at the completion of that training, then you become a solo officer assigned to whatever assignment the department gives you.
But what if you're not very good?
Well, then they do have what they call remedial, and that should be documented throughout the FTO training. It's not based on one bad thing, so to say. There would be a history of bad things that the FTO would take and show a documented history of needing more training, and more or less they're a liability or not safe to be out on their own.
So we can assume you got through that training and you didn't get any remedial training?
That's correct, sir.
And what did you do? Take us through your career, if you will, so I don't ask you, interrupt you too much. Take us through your career at North Charleston, what experiences you had, what you took part in every day.
Okay. Everybody starts off just as a patrolman, riding in a marked police car, as the common perception of a police officer would be, answering calls for service and doing things of that nature. When I was done with FTO training, that was my assignment. I did that for roughly 10 months or 11 months, and I was selected to go to what the department calls the SPEED team. And that stands for Selective Police Enforcement to Enhance and Deter.
I'm
And
sorry.
Selective Police Enforcement to Enhance and Deter. I'm sorry, I'll try and slow down. That's kind of a street crimes unit, they refer to it as, for lack of a better term. They do a multitude of things. They'll do proactive patrols where they'll saturate high crime neighborhoods and address crime that way. They'll do undercover drug buys and prostitution operations and things of that nature. They do uniform and plainclothes operations. I held that assignment for about 3 years.
Was that before the institution of Comstat?
Yes, sir, it was.
But the same principle?
Somewhat correct. There were some, we targeted areas where crime was higher, yes.
And the speed team, that was supplemental officers on duty in an area in addition to the regular street patrol?
Yes, sir. In general, the speed team officers don't answer calls for service or things of that nature. They're assigned their own mission for the day, so to speak.
Based on crime statistics and needs in that community?
Right, yes, sir.
After you were on the speed team, what did you do?
I was selected to go to our K-9 unit. I was given what they call a dual-purpose K-9. It's patrol duties, which would be tracking and building searches and things of that nature, and was also trained to detect narcotics. I handled that dog for roughly 4.5 years before I left K-9. Upon leaving K-9, I was promoted to the rank of corporal. I went back to patrol on an evening shift. I was the corporal of that team for roughly a year. I was then promoted to the rank of sergeant.
Well, let's go back to the K-9 unit. Tell us, that dog, did that dog have a name?
It was ARAC.
And you and ARAC were teamed together?
Yes, sir.
And did you have a particular area of the city that you worked in?
The way it worked is, for the most part, it was myself and another officer. We were assigned to night shift. We had responsibility of the whole city, and we found it easiest. We usually split the city in half. It's how we did it for the best response for the officers and for the citizens.
And so that was a patrol unit, marked unit,
Yes, sir.
with dog in it and with the handler?
Yes, sir. The dog was with me 24/7. I took it home and everything else.
Who determined what hours and what days you would work?
That was determined by I was advised by my sergeant. I don't know who gave him that information.
And did you work 24/7?
No, sir.
What, were you available 24/7?
There was a rotating on-call K-9. It wasn't always me. There was a schedule set up a month in advance. There was always a K-9 on-call, or at that time there was, for the most part, always a K-9 working, and then there was an on-call K-9 if there was not one working.
And you did that for some 4.5, 5 years?
Yes, sir, about 4.5 years.
And what rank were you when you left the K-9 unit?
PFC. patrolman first class,
And where did you go next?
to evening shift patrol.
Tell us what that means, evening shift.
It's evening shift designated by the hours. Roughly come into work around 3 in the afternoon. The shifts have changed. I don't recall the exact time from then, but roughly 3 in the afternoon, and it was a 10-hour shift. Much like it is now, you have the same assigned zones, your responsible area in which you work. You're not responsible for the whole city.
Did your shift overlap, how many shifts a day?
There's 3 shifts a day.
10 hours per shift, so you overlap 6 hours a day?
Evening shift has one of the larger overlaps, because usually night shift will come in at 10, and then the evening shift usually gets off around 1 or so.
And what area did you patrol at that time?
It was mostly, they designated by zones. It was mostly zone 4 and 5, which is the Remount Road to Durant area, Charleston Farms, Liberty Hill,
The
Cameron.
bureaus that were employed at that time, south, central, and north, were there 3 bureaus at that time?
Yes, sir.
And then they're divided up by zone,
Yes, sir.
and you were a sergeant within central?
I was a corporal. Shortly after going back to patrol, I was promoted to the rank of corporal, which is one below a sergeant.
And what is the difference between a patrolman, a corporal, and a sergeant?
Mostly designated by responsibilities. At that time, the corporal was being used more or less as a stepping stone, and as a pool of selectees for sergeant. It was a tested rank that you were promoted to, and then you had to be that rank to make it on to sergeant. So your responsibilities increased slightly from a PFC to a corporal, and you're kind of the sergeant's right-hand man, so to speak. They tried to increase your responsibilities by having the patrolman come to you with questions and allowing you to do some of the roll calls and easing you into the next rank.
And today they call that master patrolman, is that correct?
Yes, sir, master patrol officer.
And going back to the geographic areas that you covered, the zone 4 and 5 would be the same as it is today, back when you were
Yes, sir.
patrolling? And that would include Charleston Farms?
Yes, sir.
And what type of statistic analysis was done in that area at that time?
As far as crime, or
Correct.
it's always been a high crime area. I can't remember if CompStat was going when I went back to evening shift or not. CompStat was started right around that time period, in which case CompStat is where they analyze crime based on time of day and day of week and what kind of crime is happening and what geographical area, and try and move resources to that area during those times. Charleston Farms has always been on that list for one time of day or another.
And those were the areas where there'd be supplemental police presence?
Yes, sir.
Now, you left the speed team. Did the speed team disappear? I mean,
No, sir.
what happened to that?
Speed team is still around. That's still an active team.
What about, did you work in any other specialized units?
Yes, sir. When I got promoted to the rank of sergeant, they had just created a team called the PACE team, which is Police and Community Engagement Team.
And what was the purpose of that team?
It differed from the speed team in the fact that the city's divided up into 3 what they call bureaus. Each bureau has a captain responsible for it, and the PACE team gave officers to each captain, without trying to be too confusing. They gave 4 officers is what the team was designed to have, 4 officers per bureau. And instead of coming in working 9 to 5, say, for the whole team, each captain could designate what neighborhood and what hours they wanted those 4 officers working. So essentially, I had 3 teams within one team, and they all could be working different neighborhoods and different hours.
Sort of decentralization for the local supervisors to call on extra resources.
Correct.
And again, that's a supplemental group on top of speed, on top of the regular patrol unit.
Yes, sir.
Now, after the PACE team, what rank were you during your time with the PACE team?
I was a sergeant.
And were you later promoted?
Yes, sir. I was promoted to rank of lieutenant, and that's when I left the PACE team.
What did you do when you became lieutenant? What was your job?
I became the night shift watch commander, where that's my current position still.
We've earlier heard that described as a midnight mail.
I've heard terms similar to that.
Flight term.
Yes, sir.
And the chief at night.
Yes, sir. More or less, the running joke is you have to get out of bed to outrank the midnight lieutenant. Everybody's sleeping then.
So anybody above you when you were on that shift would have been what they call command staff.
Yes, sir.
And tell us what your duties were as the night chief.
As the watch commander, the duties remain the same. I've been in that position for a little over 3.5 years now. I have 3 sergeants assigned to me. As the lieutenant, I'm responsible for the whole city as far as listening out for major activities or calls and ensure each sergeant is running their team properly and as far as assignments and things of that nature.
Did your list of sergeants include Sergeant Christy Prosser?
Yes, sir, at one point.
And where was she located?
She was the South Sergeant, South Night Shift Sergeant.
And did your list of sergeants include Sergeant Allen?
Yes, sir, at one point.
Where was he located?
He was also a South Night Shift Sergeant.
Did you know Officer Slager?
Yes, sir.
In what capacity, how would you know him?
He was assigned to the set of patrol teams I was responsible for. He reported to one of my sergeants, so to speak.
Prosser and Allen?
Yes, sir.
And what shift was that?
That was night shift.
And what geographical location?
That was the south area of the city, South Bureau.
In your rank as the lieutenant over the sergeants and over the patrolmen, were you responsible to investigate use of force?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury about what would initiate a use of force report and what your position was in the review of those documents.
Yes, sir. The department refers to the report as an interdepartmental report, and that's initiated by the sergeant. And when they do that is if there's any kind of weapon used, such as a taser or aspeton or OC spray, any kind of use of force, other than like an empty hand control, if I just grab someone's arm, an interdepartmental doesn't need to be done unless there's injury. So anytime there's injury or any kind of weapon used, as far as use of forces go, the sergeant will respond to the scene and they'll do a preliminary investigation there with the facts of what they have and compare what's the officer saying with the details, speak to the suspect if possible at the scene. They then complete the first stage of the interdepartmental report, which is, it has an investigative stage. It has an incident part where they write out more or less the whole incident. Then it has a part where the sergeant will write out an investigation of what they did. And then the end part of the interdepartmental is conclusions of whether they think they violated any policies, whether they think anything else should be done or not. And it's their opinion. They then forward that to the lieutenant, which would be my rank. I review the incident, more or less what they did and their conclusions. If I agree with it, then I put my name on it and I send it to the captain. Same process goes with the captain, and the captain will send it to the deputy chief, which ultimately is the division commander. As far as patrol goes, it's made up of 3 captains and 1 deputy chief. So it subsequently goes up the chain of command.
After it's reviewed up the chain of command, then what happens to it?
I believe it goes to the Office of Professional Standards is the policy.
Now, is that a paper whip, or is that something that the lieutenant and the captain actually reevaluates?
We reevaluate them.
And there have been occasions where you've sent them back down for further investigation?
Well, there's a couple options. If I don't ever tell the sergeant what they think. So if the sergeant thinks they did good or they did not do good, I will talk to them about them. I may show them a policy, let them think about it again. If they're, confident I made the right decision. My option as the next level reviewing it, I can type up a memo of my opinions and attach it to it and send it up. And the same goes for the captain. If the captain disagrees with what I said or the sergeant said, they have the same option. So it can change as it goes up.
Is it standard protocol how those use of force incidents are written up? Is there a standardization of that?
As far as, I don't understand.
You had indicated earlier that the sergeant then, the protocol calls for them talking to the person who force was used against.
Yes, sir.
Is that standard?
Yes, sir. If they're available and they're on scene, yes, sir.
Did you have any interaction with Officer Slager in use of force reports when he worked the night shift in the South Bureau?
I would have been the reviewing lieutenant for the teams that you named, with Sergeant Prosser, Sergeant Allen. For most of that time, I would have been the reviewing lieutenant. There's a short time where night shift was split between 2 lieutenants, but I would have been the secondary reviewing authority for those use of force reports.
Do you ever have, or do you now have a memory where you were concerned about Officer Slager, his attitude, his behavior, his respect for the public, his use of force, any of the issues like that?
No, sir. I didn't have a tremendous amount of direct interaction with him. I had some. I try not to sit in an office all night. As a lieutenant, I like to go out and try and respond to calls with the officers as I can. I had interaction with him on those occasions. But in general, best case scenario, I'd like the sergeants to handle any interactions, and then the sergeant reports that to me as far as negative things. And I didn't hear from the sergeant about Officer Slager, so not hearing about somebody is a good thing.
And if there was excessive use of indiscriminate behavior, if you will, whether that was interaction with citizens or the use of force or improper use of assets of the city, was there a automatic review based on a computer analysis of what that officer had done?
It's not automatic on a use. There is, I believe they call it the early warning system or something to that effect. I've never been assigned to the Office of Professional Standards, so I may be wrong on the name, but it is computer software which things are entered, and there's a certain number of uses of forces that will trigger an alert, so to speak. Same with vehicle accidents and other things. Just a certain number will trigger something in this computer, and it's not necessarily a certain number of things that were deemed unjustified. It's just a matter of uses of force. So it doesn't matter if every interdepartmental, myself through the deputy chief, agreed that everything was fine and the use of force was justified. A certain number of those will trigger this system.
And that early warning system was instituted while you were employed by North Charleston Police Department?
Yes, sir. I was in the K-9 unit.
And did you have an opportunity to exercise it?
Yes, sir, I did.
If you would tell the jury that, your experience with the early warning system.
I was told the officer's not advised of anything. They're not called in and interviewed. This is more of an administrative thing to more or less make staff aware and the Office of Professional Standards aware, you know, that these certain things have happened. I was told by my supervisor in K-9 at the time that when they implemented this, I was the first person to actually trigger this early warning system. And it was off of use of force, and it was from K-9 apprehensions. All of them were K-9 apprehensions, where I used my patrol dog to apprehend a fleeing criminal. All of them investigated, all of them, you know, deemed appropriate, but nevertheless, due to the number, it triggered this early warning system.
I understand that the definition of use of force, if the patrolman takes out a taser and presents the taser, doesn't deploy the taser, that's a use of force.
Yes, sir.
Supposing the officer takes out his Glock and presents it, is that a use of force?
Yes, sir.
So any type of present, not just use, is a use of force.
Yes, sir.
Now, during your tenure at North Charleston, continuing to today, have you been certified as an instructor?
Yes, sir. I'm an instructor for numerous areas.
Would you tell the jury what the areas you are an instructor in?
Yes, sir. I was a field training officer, as we spoke of earlier, for almost 9 years. Once you get promoted to supervisory rank, you're no longer eligible to be a field training officer just because of your daily responsibilities. But as soon as I was eligible for that position, I obtained it, and I held it as long as I could until I became a supervisor. Since that point, I'm a certified basic instructor through the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy. I'm a firearms instructor, tactical shooting instructor, patrol rifle instructor.
I'm sorry, firearms instructor?
I'm sorry. Yeah, basic instructor, firearms instructor, tactical shooting instructor, patrol rifle instructor, precision rifle instructor, SWAT instructor. Are you ready? I'm an active shooter instructor, a civilian response to active shooter instructor, a taser instructor, OC instructor, which is pepper spray, less lethal impact munitions. Distraction device. Chemical munitions. Chemical munitions. That's all I got off the top of my head.
What I would ask you is what you are not certified to instruct in. So, seriousness though, you're an instructor in all areas in which there is resistance to a police officer, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So, and the different assets that a patrol officer could use to initiate compliance with instruction.
Yes, sir.
Tell us about OC spray. And are you familiar with Officer Slager's incident on April 4th of 2015?
Yes, sir.
How are you familiar with it?
I recall when the incident happened, and you couldn't hardly turn on the TV without seeing a video clip of some nature of it.
Well, we know that the media may not have had all the factors, right?
Yes, sir.
But your familiarity with the type of incident, that is where somebody is running from a traffic stop.
Yes, sir.
What has been your experience for an individual who runs from having a brake light out?
It's not normal rational behavior, and my personal experience, I've never had somebody run for a minor traffic infraction alone. I may have stopped them for a minor traffic infraction, but at the end of the day, that's never the end of the charges. I've never caught somebody for speeding or for a brake light. I've never caught them in, that's it, they ran for that. That's never been the case. It's usually fleeing for some kind of imminent arrest that this person knows of.
Or involvement in criminal activity?
Yes, sir.
Now, you know that there was a foot chase.
Yes, sir.
You know that there was a taser deployment.
Yes, sir.
Tell us the role that OC spray could have or should have been utilized in that situation.
It's my opinion as an OC instructor that if I was in that situation, as far as those two aspects go, I wouldn't have deployed OC spray, and I wouldn't have deployed OC spray while I was actually chasing a suspect for two reasons. One is for the OC spray to be effective, it needs to get in your eyes. So whether it's sprayed directly in your eyes or whether it's sprayed above your eyes and flows down into your eyes, either way, it needs to be in your eyes for it to be effective. So the only way to get it in someone's eyes that's fleeing from you is to get in front of them, in which case that's not tactically sound or rarely possible to be able to be fast enough to run in front of somebody fleeing from you. The other drawback to spraying while somebody's fleeing from you is no matter what kind of spray it is, whether it's foam or stream or whatever kind, it's going to be in the air. It has to go from point A to point B. Therefore, it's going to be in the air. And while you're running, you stand a high likelihood of running through what you just sprayed, and therefore incapacitating yourself. As far as a physical altercation on the ground after the taser, there's other reasons not to use OC spray in that case, again, in my opinion. One would be the effectiveness, and I think that's probably the most important thing. If I need to use any kind of intermediate weapon during a fight, I need it to be effective as soon as possible. And the reason I say it wouldn't be effective is if I'm in a ground fight, I'm very, very close to somebody. I'm on top of them or they're on top of me, and I definitely don't want to spray up if they're on top of me because what goes up comes down. So best case scenario, if I'm on top of somebody, I don't want to spray them because there's a propellant, and no matter what you're using, you have nitrogen propellants, you have alcohol propellants. The can is not full of just the actual pepper. There has to be something that carries the pepper from the can to whatever you're spraying. And it used to be alcohol, that was the most common, but now with tasers and everything, it's nitrogen or some other propellant. But we'll say alcohol, it's easy to understand and picture. If I don't allow the chemical, the OC, the pepper to get off of the carrier, to dissipate from the carrier, it's not going to be effective. So if I'm fighting with somebody and I spray them, if this paper is what I spray, the OC is still going to be highly diluted by the alcohol or whatever the propellant is, in which case it's not going to be effective. That's one reason I wouldn't want to use it on somebody up close. Pepper spray is for a standoff or somebody confronting you several feet away where it has time to release from the carrier. The other reason that that you wouldn't want to use it, if I'm fighting for my life on the ground, injuring the suspect is not high on my priority list, so to speak. But in general, You wouldn't want to use pepper spray, any kind of propellant on somebody up close because you have what they call hydro needles. It comes out with such a high velocity that it will actually perforate the surface of the eye. And so you need that distance.
What about a baton?
As far as running goes, in my opinion, it's not practical. The batons we carry, if you carry one, it's not even mandatory to carry a baton if you have a taser. It's only about this long. So they teach you to strike somebody more or less in the side of the leg. They call it a common peroneal, is where a common baton strike is going to be. So if I'm chasing after somebody, I have to be right up on them to strike them with a baton it's 18 inches long. So to get that close behind somebody, our feet are going to be getting all tangled up. It's going to be virtually impossible to strike somebody with a baton that close. Me personally, I can base it off of personal experience. I've used my baton one time in my whole career, and the only reason I used it one time because it didn't work very well at all.
And you say it's 18 inches long, but that's after you extend it, is that?
Yes, sir.
So it's like 6 inches and
Yes, sir.
you flick it. Is that an appropriate asset to use in a ground fight?
No, sir.
And people who work for North Charleston Police Department who carry a taser are authorized not to carry a baton.
That's correct, sir.
How about the use of a taser in those circumstances?
In that day, case law has since changed it, but speaking of the parameters of that day, it's very common to use a taser on a fleeing person. It's the safest and most proficient way to apprehend somebody that's fleeing from you. And I say that because your only other option to apprehend somebody that's fleeing from you, because we've already said the taser, the OC is not going to be effective, and the ASP is not very useful. So that's your only other option is going to be to tackle somebody. It's possible to tackle somebody, but it's not very prudent because you have a high risk of injury. You have a high risk of injury to the suspect and a high risk of injury to the officer, just by the mere sake of tackling. You know, if I tackle right, I'm going to land on top of the suspect, which in case is going to injure him or injure me with bone-to-bone contact. That's one of the reasons that taser is so beneficial, is it was used to lessen injuries for officers and suspects.
How about just giving up and turning around and going back to headquarters?
You mean the officer?
Yes.
I suppose that's always an option, but I prefer not to have that officer working for me. You have the criminal element out there fleeing. If we just let all the criminals go, it wouldn't be a very pleasant place to live.
How, is there a comparison of a foot chase to a vehicle chase that you could better explain to us that reasoning of continuing the chase?
In that case, to use that as an example of, you know, the video I've seen, if I initiate a traffic stop on somebody, and during that traffic stop, they're seized by definition, by wording of the court. That person is seized, they're detained, they're arrested, splitting hairs, whatever you want to call it. They're not free to leave, that person being the driver of that vehicle. To get out and flee from the vehicle, you're not free to leave unless the officer in charge of that traffic stop says you're free to leave. So to get out and flee, in my personal opinion, is no different than if the person puts the car in drive and drives off. Either way, they're separating themselves from that lawful contact that the officer had.
And if somebody was in the vehicle at a traffic stop for a brake light or any other reason and they took off, what do you do?
Of course, you pursue them.
And same would apply to a foot chase.
Yes, sir.
Now, have you ever experienced or have you ever observed somebody being live stunned with a taser? That is, a taser without the prongs being deployed.
Yes, sir. I have experienced it myself. I have done it to people in training as a taser instructor, and I have also done it on the street to actively resisting suspects.
Have you ever seen someone be drive stunned that caused them to be totally incapacitated?
Yes, sir. For the sake of incapacitation, to be able to put them on the ground, I have done it myself.
Can you slow that down? Because I'm losing you too fast.
I'm sorry. It's a habit. Incapacitation, as far as to enable them from standing and to put them on the ground, I have done that myself with what they call a brachial drive stun. To my recollection, I think I'm the only person to have a need or a reason to deploy it. And a brachial drive stun, the brachial nerve runs down the side of the neck on both sides. So a drive stun is more or less a taser without the cartridge on there. So it's merely, they call it pain compliance, but I'll explain to you, on this major nerve that's running, straight into the brain. My instance where I had firsthand experience with it is I had a suspect that we wanted to take into custody. It was a SWAT call out. And I attempted to use the probes on him, and I put 2 probes into him, and for whatever reason, they didn't make a good connection. And in which case, I immediately followed up. He was sitting on the edge of a bed. I ran around, and he stood up once I hit him with the probes, and they had no effect. And I ran around on the bed, and as you saw when I walked in, I'm not probably the tallest person in the world. So I got a little advantage, and I jumped up on the bed behind him, and I did a brachial drive stun down, and it put him straight to the ground.
And if that was done to an officer who is carrying his assets, what's that scenario like?
It's the same. It's not incapacitation as far as what they call NMI, neuromuscular incapacitation. It's different than that, and that's what you get with the probes. It's not incapacitation where all the muscles are locked up, but it's incapacitation where you can't resist that. If I wanted to put somebody on the ground, such as the example I just gave, you drive the force downward, and it's such a major nerve there, you're experiencing an incredible pain, and I can guide you wherever I want you to go with that. So I can put you on the ground. So in a police officer's opinion, being on the ground with a suspect on top is a pretty bad place to be. So that's a potential there. And even without incapacitation, you can't hold something if I'm drive stunning you. So I could disarm anybody with a drive stun. It's not going to incapacitate your body. You'll still have full motion of your legs or your arm, but if you're holding something in this hand, I can easily make you release it with a drive stun. It's just going to be a natural reaction. You're going to go like that. So armed or not, you can incapacitate or whatever with a drive stun.
You had mentioned earlier that one of your areas of training is active shooter training.
Yes, sir.
Would you tell us about what you do as an instructor in active shooter training?
At the time of this incident, it was implemented roughly a year or so before at the department, and I was one of the instructors. At that time, we really had 3 what you call lead instructors, and I was one of them. And we did a classroom portion. And an active shooter, by definition, more or less, we're just teaching the officers how to respond to something actively in progress, as you see so often on the news now, unfortunately. Somebody goes into a building and just starts shooting. It's not like the old days where you surround the building with SWAT and wait for something to happen, because that's been proven in several incidents that's not the appropriate response. So we need to teach our officers that the sooner they get in and get active in a situation like that, the sooner the problem is going to be resolved. And that's what that training is based around, not teaching them to stay outside, to teach them how to go in as best as we can. What we did is we had some classroom portion, explained the theories and principles, and then we had some scenarios for them to run through.
And is that where you would try to help an officer make appropriate decisions?
Yes, sir. We'd have scenarios set up, and each scenario is designed by myself and the other 2 instructors as a group. And none of the scenarios are random, where we just put people out there in a hallway with a gun or something. They're all thought out. They all have intentions of, if the officer does this right, this is going to be the end result. If the officer does it wrong, this will be the result. They all have a process behind it. So we'll let the officer go through and we'll work it out, right or wrong, and then once it's over, we'll debrief, is what we call it, with the officer.
Lieutenant Buskirk's involved in the same type of training?
Yes, sir. He was one of the 2 I was thinking.
In terms of stress-induced training, what does the North Charleston Police Department prepare its officers for making good decisions under stressful circumstances?
That is, the active shooter training we spoke of is it. They get, like I said, depending on the size of the class, 4 scenarios or 5 scenarios that the individual officer will run through, and that's what they get for the year. And currently that's done in the annual training.
And give us, in terms of hours, days, or minutes, how much actual training an individual officer would have for active shooter training?
The actual training, they are there on site for an afternoon for that portion of training. An afternoon being 12 to 4, 12 to 5, or what have you. The actual hands-on under stress is far less. If you take out all the admin stuff, for lack of a better word, setting up the role players, loading the guns, the debrief, if you take just the part where they have a weapon in their hand or they're under some kind of stress or making decisions, I would guess it's a minute to a minute and a half per scenario, and like I said, they get 4 or 5. So the actual time under stress, if you just could crunch it all together, it may be 5 to 7 minutes.
And that stress is from yelling at them? That's the old Marine Corps BI?
There is some yelling, yes, sir. It's stressful in its own just to be in a situation, even though you know it's not live bullets or anything else. But we do use simunition guns where you may or may not get shot with a little paintball, and it doesn't feel great. But we'll do a little yelling, and then they know there may or may not be. We call it active shooter, but sometimes they don't have to shoot. Sometimes there's not a bad guy in there.
And the patrol officers or whoever know that it's training, not real life.
They know that going in, but yeah, it's forgotten fairly quickly.
And mistakes are made.
Yes, sir.
In terms of firearms training, you're an expert, you're a trainer in that area as well.
Yes, sir.
Tell us the difference between qualification and training, what training there is for a patrolman in North Charleston for firearms training.
Yes, sir. Qualification, to start with, is it's done annually. Every officer has to qualify with whatever weapon they're issued. For us, in general, it's the Glock 21 handgun. There's a set course of fire that everybody shoots, and it's a certain amount of rounds, bullets fired at different yard lines, and everybody does the same course. Whatever the course is. So many rounds are shot at 3 yards, so many rounds shot at 5 yards, and then they go through that 40-round course. And that's called by a firearms instructor, and each string of fire, they call it, each yard line is timed. And that's the qualification, and it's based off a point system. Count the holes on the target, where they're at. You need this many points to pass. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how the points are made up. It doesn't matter if they're all in the 5 or if they're all in the 4 ring, which is the outside. As long as the points add up to the right amount, then you pass. That's qualification.
You show you this document that's been marked as Defendant's 99. Ask you if you recognize this, and you can tell the jury what that is.
Yes, sir. This is the qualification course that's in place.
And I would ask you to produce this as Defendant's 99 for evidence. Judge, Mr. Ackerman. In terms of the annual qualification of a police officer, is that the report card?
Yes, sir. This is completed for each person that qualifies.
It's hard to see the way it's laid out there. Could we do a little better than that? And so tell us, jury may not be able to see it precisely, but just take us through that report card.
Each course of fire, sir?
Yes.
Okay. The shooter starts off with the target as close as the course goes, which is 3 yards. They're given 6 seconds to shoot 5 rounds. Now, all these courses of fire, except for the last one, which I'll indicate, come from the holster. So the officer standing facing the target, and on the command of fire or whatever is given, they draw their weapon, and they will go through these courses of fire.
So the first column would say how far away the target is?
Yes, sir.
Is it a static, non-moving target?
Yes, sir. They just hang. They don't spin or anything.
Is the shooter in a static position? In other words,
Correct.
The shooter's not moving either.
That's correct, sir.
And the first 3-yard shoot is 5 rounds,
Yes, sir.
and they're given 6 seconds to accomplish that.
Correct.
So if they take 7 seconds, I assume they lose points.
It's not so much points, and we have a whistle, and we control that the best we can. So,
But the encouragement is to fire as quickly as you can and center mass on the target.
Yes, sir. Such as a 7-second shot. If I'm the firearm instructor, I definitely let you know that you shot late.
So is there any, in this report card, any extra points for reassessment?
No, sir.
Is reassessment taught on the firing range or firearms instruction?
Not so much reassessment, more, the words that would come to mind is more scanning. Officers are taught to scan, and that is something we encourage, you know, even on a qualification course. And scanning would be more to break tunnel vision.
Now we're getting into areas that the jury's not familiar with. When you say break tunnel vision, what does that mean?
Even on this course of fire, people get so apprehensive because, you know, in theory, your job could rely on qualifying. You have to carry a firearm as a police officer, so you need to pass this. Anytime you have a pass or fail course like this, even though it's not difficult, it induces stress in people just for the sake of everybody wants to pass. And then those that know they can pass want to do better than their friend next to them. So no matter what, you know, sometimes people induce their own stress, but nevertheless, there's stress from something in this. And what I said about tunnel vision is when you fire at the target, you're so worried about your group. And if you're a good shooter, hopefully you're shooting a small group. And if you're a bad shooter, you're shooting all over the target. But either way, you're staring at it. And scanning, we don't want people to get so focused in on a target. Even though this is paper, you try and practice as much as you can for the real world. And we want people to look around, to break, what I refer to as break that tunnel vision. Number one, we want to make sure nobody's coming up behind you. And number two, even if nobody is coming up behind you, I don't want you to shoot and then just stare at the target. I want you to shoot and I want you to look around. So again, we call that scanning for threats.
I'll show you what's marked as defendants 93 and defendants 94.
Yes, sir.
Ask you if you're familiar with those.
Oh, yes, sir.
What generally are those? Just generally.
This is how we explain more or less what they call sight alignment and sight picture to a shooter if they're having trouble with that.
Okay, and the other, is it?
This is going to be what more or less a proper sight focus is going to look like. So I could
That's good. I'll
explain.
give it back.
Okay.
Now I would ask that we introduce defendants exhibit 93. The evidence at this time as well as defendants exhibit 94.
Mild objection to be relevant, Your Honor.
Do you object to it being admitted?
I object to it on the basis of relevance.
I can see the exhibit. Uh, 93 is admitted over objection. Heard no testimony concerning 94.
So with respect to 93, Mr. Ackerman, if we could put that up so the jury could look at it. Could you describe what that is and how you interpret that? How that is instructive of what you instruct in firearms training?
Yes, sir. Something like this would be used to teach somebody that's either having trouble or a new shooter what their sights and what the target should look like. There's a little more to it than a lot of people think. The eyes are kind of a tricky thing. An eye can only focus on one plane at a time. And in shooting, no matter what you're shooting at, you have at least 3 planes. You have your rear sight, you have your front sight, and then you have the target. You can only focus on one of those things, so you have to pick which one to focus on. And if you pick the wrong one, it's going to inherently affect your shooting ability and your accuracy. There's only one correct one, and the one correct one is obviously the one marked correct. That's going to be the front sight. Out of those 3 planes, your rear sight, your front sight, and the target, you only want to focus on your front sight. That makes you have accurate shots. So in saying that, being only able to focus on one thing, everything else is going to be blurry. Your target's going to be blurry, and your rear sight's going to be blurry, just as indicated in this picture. That's proper, sight focus.
You have a pointer in front of you on the desk.
Yes, sir.
Would you go up and, in case there are members of the jury that are not familiar with weapons, show us exactly what you mean by that and incorrect and correct sighting on the weapon.
Yes, sir. We'll start with the correct one. Well, your 3 planes, obviously this blur here is going to be the target. The one on each side is going to be your rear sight, and then that's going to be your front sight. In correct shooting, as indicated in the slide, your focus needs to be right there. So if your focus is on that, then the other 2 planes are going to be blurry. You're not going to be able to see them. It's going to look like that. Your other 2 options of having an incorrect sight picture, you focus in on the wrong thing, you focus on the rear sight, in which case your front sight and the target's going to be blurry. Or then you have the opposite. I focus on my target, but I can't see my sights. So whether you're familiar with shooting or not, deductive reasoning would tell you if you can't see your sights, you're not going to shoot very accurate. So in saying that, the focus on the front sight is the really only correct way to focus on sights in the shoot.
If you take a look at what's been marked for defendant's ID at this point, 94, and tell us what that represents.
This is representing what it would be similar to the correct slide up there. It's a blurry rear sight, a crisp, clear front sight, and some type of blurry orange target.
Ron, we would ask that you please at this time.
Submitted over objection.
May we take a look, please, Mr. Ackman, at defendant's 94. So, again, if you would, use the pointer if you would like exactly what that shows.
Again, this is going to be the rear view of the weapon. This is going to be the back part of the slide. Blurry right here and here is going to be your rear sights. You're in focus, and this is a good example of how I teach people to shoot. When I say in focus, you should see these sharp corners right here. That means that's in focus. And then you're shooting at, and this would be some kind of orange target. Again, that's how it should look. A blurry target, blurry rear sight.
But then while you're up, why don't you come on down. Bring your pointer. So, what do you say there? Part of your training is action, reaction. Explain to the jury the concept of action and reaction.
With action and reaction, what we teach the officers is reaction is always behind the ball, is I would say. Reaction is always going to be slower. Reaction can never get ahead of action. And we give an example of that, and we do it in all the classes. And it's too time consuming to have all the students go through and have hands-on doing it, but we'll show them. And it's usually not hard to get a participant, because when I describe the drill to you, there'll probably be somebody thinking that they can do it as well. So what we do to show them that reaction is never going to be as fast is we'll take an officer, and again, this is with not real weapons, simunition gun, shooting paintball, I just pull the trigger and shoot in the air. And what we do, Mr. Slager, maybe you list the officer.
Is that one that's on receiving end or giving?
That's the loser.
Carol? Okay, let's do it.
All right. So if that's his firearm, and this is what we tell them with these guns, with simunition or what have you, we tell them, you can stand, you're the officer, you're challenging me, and I'm going to be the bad guy. And we'll have students volunteer for this, and we let the officer stand however they want. We can say, you can point the weapon at them, you can have your finger on the trigger. And that's, of course, what they always choose, because it's going to be faster, which it is. And then we put this person, across the room, whatever side of the room we have, this will be fine. And they have a firearm in their hand, holding it at their side, finger down on the trigger. And the drill is, I will always win, because he can't react fast enough. He may get a shot off, but it's never the first shot. The only way he can get a shot off first is if he anticipates what I'm doing, which that means he's shooting before he's actually seeing or feeling the threat. So you just can't beat that.
So you're saying a police officer who has a weapon facing a suspect with his finger on the trigger cannot get that shot off fast enough to prevent the suspect from shooting?
Yes, sir. And it's proven in every single class that we do. We have students in, and we'll explain the drill, we'll explain that to them, and there's always officers that think they're faster, always. But it's just the mere nature of it, because the brain can't react. Because as the officer, what he's trying to do is he's trying to look at me, observe what I'm doing, observe the action, decide what he wants to do, and then he's trying to act on it. And you can't do all that. I'm already at act. I've already seen him. I already figured it out. I've already decided what I'm going to do. So I'm already there, and he's going through all those other steps, trying to catch up to that point.
On a more simple plane, are you married?
Yes, sir.
Do you have children? Do you have nephews and nieces or kids in the neighborhood? You ever play this game?
Yes, sir. Now you're
And that's what you're talking about, right? Action, reaction.
Yes, sir.
And even though you knew I was going to do that, you couldn't get your hand in.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you. You trained from A to Z in North Charleston. Tell us about the physical training given to patrol.
As physical as far as exercise or stress, or I don't.
To make sure, what is the department policy to make sure that their patrol men and women are physically able to conduct the duties of being patrolmen, that they're physically capable to do that?
There's a test that you take when you get hired as a new hire that's required by the Criminal Justice Academy that you need to pass to get in, and there's nothing further. As far as physical training for the general patrol officer, there's no physical training or follow-up testing.
The physical training, I see you're pretty beefed up. Why is that?
SWAT does physical training. SWAT trains, and we're on a different training schedule and different training regime than, say, the patrol officers.
So the specialized service units of SWAT and others have physical fitness requirements?
Yes, sir. As far as actual testing, SWAT takes a test every 6 months. That's a standard physical fitness test for us that we have to pass.
A patrol officer who's perhaps patrolling the most primary area of the city, what type of physical training do they get?
None.
With respect to training, did we already cover the handcuffing? I believe we did, post-shooting handcuffing?
No, sir. I've not spoken of that.
Okay, would you tell us what the training is and the instructions are in a post-shooting handcuffing?
Officers are taught post anything there to handcuff. The closest to post-shooting handcuffing that we have would be the same active shooter type training we spoke of and SWAT training that I do monthly. That's part of all the drills. The drills aren't ended. Sometimes an officer will go in a room and engage a threat and just be glad it's over. And, of course, that's when the stress starts from the instructors. Everything is always carried through, and it's not over till everybody is detained.
So to handcuff somebody after a shooting, tell the jury why they do that. What is the knowledge of the shooter about the person who's been shot at the time they handcuff them?
Well, they were shot because they were a threat of some nature, and the officer can't decide necessarily when that threat is over. The threat has been lessened to that point to get handcuffs on them. Officers aren't medically trained officers can never, declare, what medical condition someone is in. So if they were a threat, they continue to be a threat. More than likely, this person still wasn't searched. So even if I'm engaged in some kind of encounter, and I do use lethal force on somebody, number one, I'm not sure if my lethal force was actually lethal or just injured them. And number two, I haven't even searched this person yet to start with. And as far as searching goes, police are taught to never search without handcuffing somebody, a suspect anyways.
So we've all heard about shooting an unarmed suspect. When do you know whether the person is armed or unarmed?
Once I've searched them, hopefully.
And if you don't have an opportunity to search them prior to the shooting, when do you find out if they're armed or unarmed?
Once they're placed in handcuffs and searched.
What about de-escalation? We've heard that term thrown about, de-escalation. Where does that apply in your training?
Where does it apply, or where is it taught? What?
Yes, is there such a thing as de-escalation being taught?
Currently, and I say current within the last year or so, there's been a short video that's been mandated to watch. But going back and talking of the time period of this incident, there's no de-escalation training that I'm aware of.
And following this incident, there has been de-escalation training.
Like I said, I do recall a video of some nature that people watched.
And that de-escalation training in the video revolves around disabled or handicapped.
It does center more around verbal conflicts. It's certainly nothing physical. It's not how to de-escalate a physical confrontation. And to answer your question, sir, yes, it is focused a lot on dealing with people with different mental disabilities, so to speak, and how to properly engage them or how to de-escalate a hostile person verbally.
Were you or are you now aware that Officer Slager picked up his taser immediately after the shooting?
Yes, sir.
And what is the training that would apply to the reason somebody would do that?
To secure gear, to not leave a weapon laying about.
And is there anything nefarious? Is there anything inappropriate, any ill will associated with picking that taser up?
No, sir. It's probably I would say autopilot more than anything. Officers don't leave weapons laying around. I've had officers disturb homicide scene because they see a gun there and they don't want to leave a gun laying out on a homicide scene. I show up and it's in someone's trunk instead of just securing the scene. Officers have this weird thing about not wanting to leave a weapon laying around.
Is there any explanation through training or experience of why Officer Slager would have dropped the taser and not have holstered it at that time?
Again, merely to consolidate gear, and I say that, I guess, falling back more on military terminology or thinking. I just kind of need to bring everything in instead of leaving an unsecured weapon across the field, because I'm not going to be over there and I don't know who else is coming or behind me or anything else. Just to bring everything close to me. That would be my logic.
And if it was reholstered within 28 seconds, what would that indicate to you?
So he probably would think it's best secured on his belt in the holster where it belongs versus laying loose on the ground.
Now, you're familiar, are you not, with what we've heard as the continuum of force?
Yes, sir.
Does that document accurately represent the different levels of force that are employed that your training teaches patrolmen?
Yes, sir.
Does it also list on there the aggravation factors of a suspect in response to the continuum of force?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, would ask the solicitor's permission to introduce this defendant's 95 in evidence.
I thought it was on, but I have an objection.
Can we put it?
It's admitted without objection.
Thank you, Your Honor. Can we put this under action, please? Let me give you back your weapon. And if you would take us through what we've heard about continuing force.
The officer response, sir?
Yes, let's go to the right-hand side. This is taken right out of North Charleston Police Department's use of force policy. Take us through 1 through 6 and explain to the jury what that means and give us examples.
Yes, sir. The way the continuum of force works, depending on the level of resistance offered by an individual, we start at level 1. Again, it depends on the level of resistance, but we'll discuss this for best case scenario. We're going to go up. A command presence, that can start as far as a vehicle on scene. If there's an unruly crowd or anything else, you pull a vehicle up, you can have a command presence. And by the word command, a lot of that is the appearance. If an officer pulls a dirty, muddy vehicle on scene with the paint chipping off and decals all worn off, it's not going to have near the command presence of a clean vehicle. Squared away looking vehicle, squared away being military term, if you can follow me. And the same goes for the officer. Now, once the vehicle's there, the officer's there. The same goes, a command presence. You want somebody that has a pressed uniform and looks good. It's going to be more of a presence than somebody with dirty shoes and an untucked shirt, so to speak. Moving up to communication, once I'm already there, if the problem's still not resolved by me just being there, communication is exactly that. We start off with communication, and officers have a thing, more or less there's 3 stages of communication. I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to tell, and then I'm going to make. That's the levels of communication. Of course, asking can be the most friendly. Hey, would you do this? Hey, would you do that? And if that doesn't work, I'm going to order you to do it. And if that doesn't work, then I'm going to tell you to do it. So if telling doesn't work, then we can continue up the scale of use of force. Physical control, there's kind of numerous aspects. This is where it starts branching off. A lot of things go under physical control. That could be nothing more than grabbing someone's arm, grabbing someone's wrist. If they want to resist, they have techniques called a stiff arm bar takedown, to sound fancy. It's nothing more than locking someone's joint out, and it causes a little pain. It's slight pain compliance, but you can just more or less guide somebody around like that. Under physical control, handcuffs fall under that. OC spray falls under physical control. So there's kind of a lot of variety. We start getting a lot of different tools available to us then. But there's still minimum striking or anything like that. It's all open hand, just kind of controlling somebody. Again, if that hasn't worked yet, I can go up to the next level 4 with intermediate weapons. Intermediate weapons is where the taser is going to fall, AS baton is going to fall. If we have less lethal impact beanbag rounds, any kind of striking implement more or less is going to fall under that, as well as strikes from the body. You know, if I want to strike with my hand into appropriate areas or something like that. Incapacitation, that's going to be the one step above, and that's usually going to be a strike of some nature to a major nerve area. And the most common one is the brachial plexus, like I described earlier, and that can be an open hand strike or anything else, and that's highly effective. And that could cause slight or moderate incapacitation. It could cause, hit hard enough, it could actually knock you out. Again, incapacitation, you can take stuff from level 4 and make it incapacitation depending on where those strikes are delivered. And then deadly force is somewhat self-explanatory. It's going to be any force that could be deadly. It could be your firearm. It could be something from level 4, baton, but if I struck somebody in the head, then I just took my level 4 and made it level 6.
All right, with respect to that officer response level, those are the moments of decision time. Is that correct?
Correct, and there's nothing saying, I gave a best case scenario, so we got to go through all 6. There's nothing saying that you have to go 1 through 6. I can jump around in any order that's necessary.
What determines, on the right-hand side, the officer's response level? And I emphasize the response is the terminology that's used in training.
Correct. As any instance, the suspect dictates literally everything. Everything's on this person. So however they want to act, they get the reaction from. And again, it's the same levels. They're just more or less called something different, and slight different definitions would be the resistance levels. So the suspect dictates what level of force the officer is going to use.
And tell us, go through 1 through 6 on the left side, the resistance levels, and give us examples of that.
Again, we have a presence, and an example of that would maybe just an unruly crowd, trespassers or something like that. They're just there, that's all they're doing. They could be told to leave. As we escalate up, you know, they're gonna escalate up. They might tell us, no, they're not leaving, or something like that. If they only told us that politely, then we'd be upset. Then from there, we have passive physical resistance, which means that they are physically resisting, but they're not attacking. And a very good example of that would be holding on to something. You see it a lot in protesters. You know how they lock hands or handcuff to each other, or hold on to a telephone pole, or hold on to the steering wheel and not get out of the car. All that would be levels of passive resistance. I'm resisting, but I'm not, you know, doing anything aggressive. Active physical resistance is going to be more of a pulling away. I'm doing something more aggressive than just holding something. I'm not really to the point of assaulting or attacking yet, but I'm being more active in my resistance. Running is active physical resistance, pulling away, you know, anything like that, dodging, weaving, any kind of physical action where I'm resisting the officer. And from there we go up to the more attacking movements, which would be level 5, the aggressive physical resistance, and that's going to be more fighting, attacking, fighting, you know, something other than necessarily being defensive. And then, of course, the same as aggravated physical resistance is going to be equal to deadly force, and that's going to be something where, you know, the threat of great bodily harm or death will occur.
If somebody had taken an officer's taser and attempted to use it against them, what level would that be?
Level of resistance,
Yes.
that would be a 6, an aggravated physical resistance.
Thank you. Now, you had mentioned bean bags,
Yes, sir.
so do patrolmen carry beanbag firearms?
No, sir. The only people issued the less lethal impact round, which was a beanbag round, is all members of SWAT have it, and select members of our mobile field force, which is like our riot team. They have them.
Now, if you would step down again, I won't go near you this time, but if you would stand in front of me. You, face the jury, you have talked about the first level is presence. And you talked about a nasty old police car that's paint's peeling and decals are coming off and whatnot. But police units, patrol officers, their presence is a deterrence from crime, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's why you have multiple saturation units that come in and go through the neighborhood. Could you roll up your pants, please? What is that black thing coming down your leg, and how does that apply to presence?
It's called a shirt stay, and the way it works, as you can see, there's kind of like a loop that goes around the bottom of my foot. So
Could you take your shoe off, please?
good. As you can see, it's a.
We can't see, so why don't you come over here and let everybody take it off?
Okay.
I'll hold your shoe.
It's literally like a stirrup at the end of it that goes around your foot, so it can't come undone. They make another style that connects to the top of your sock, but not too many people wear them because they just pop off your sock. So this physically can't, unless that material tears in two, it can't come off my foot. It's impossible.
So, don't show the jury, but tell us, don't show us, but tell us where it goes from there.
It goes up as one piece in this particular style, and the top of it's a Y. One part secures to the front of my shirt right here, and the other part secures to the back of my shirt right here. Everybody has different techniques and methods to secure it. Me personally, I sew a button onto the bottom of my shirt, and then the top of the shirt stays like a loop, so I loop it onto the button. So the only way that can come off is for me to rip the button off of the shirt stays itself.
So have you ever had experience in a ground fight where your shirt stayed in place?
All of them, you can't look it up.
Sure.
Right. It's impossible. As you saw, my shirt's connected to my feet and connected to the bottom of my shirt. So it may come slightly untucked, but my shirt can, it's physically impossible for my shirt to come untucked. Such that you know the untucked shirt where you see the shirt tail. It's impossible connected to my feet.
With respect to the continuum of force, one of those areas, could we put those back up, please, Mr. Acton? On the left side, the resistance. Items number 4, 5, and 6 on resistance level, and the officer's understanding of that, can it depend on the physical attributes of the person who's resisting?
Yes, sir. There's many variables. To answer your question, yes. It can depend on the physical attributes of the person resisting. It can depend on the physical attributes of the officer, the number of people resisting, the number of officers on scene, the skill level of the person resisting, the skill level of the officer. There's many attributes. It's not a cut and dry.
So if it was a young 100-pound person, perhaps the officer's response level should be less than what is described in the options?
It could be. I mean, the example given in many training classes is if a 12-year-old punches you in the face, it's not going to be near the same as if a grown man punches you in the face. It's the same action, but a reasonable person would consider that different.
And if somebody is a weightlifter and trained in martial arts, it would likewise be the opposite, correct?
Yes, sir. I would think the officer would probably figure out those things pretty quick.
Now, if there is a fight on the ground between an officer and a suspect, is it correct to say that there's always a gun in that fight?
Yes, sir. That's something they start teaching at the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy, and we continue to tell people. And the phrase is that there's always one gun in the altercation, and you brought it with you. So.
And what does that mean? Get us out of the academic world and tell us in real life, in the streets of North Charleston, what does that mean?
Assuming I haven't searched the person, I don't know if they're armed or not, so that can still be up in the air. I know if I'm dealing with somebody that I have a weapon on me, that's a given because I'm a police officer. I would like to keep retention of that weapon. Of course, that's going to be the best thing to happen, but there's a chance, if everything went wrong, that the suspect may use my own weapon. So that's what that means is if I get in a fight or an altercation, especially something as dangerous as fighting on the ground, I may lose my weapon. So it doesn't matter. Even let's flip it and say I did search the suspect. I know he's not armed. I'm still armed, and there's a chance I could lose my weapon. So there's always going to be a weapon present in an officer-involved fight.
Going back to April of 2015, you're familiar with the carrying item for a weapon at that time, a holster?
Yes, sir.
And would you explain to the jury the difference between what was handed out by supply at that time and what's handed out today and the reason for the change?
Yes, sir. There's still some of those holsters in service now. To clarify, they're probably 50-50, but to talk about that particular holster, which was the primary issue then, almost everybody had that holster. The way it worked is the weapon went in the holster, and there's a leather strap that comes around the front, which would be pretty much where the rear sight is, and that snaps on the inside, and that's what holds the weapon there. So These aren't normal holsters like you'd go up to the sporting goods store and buy. They have some kind of retention. You just can't draw the gun in and out. There's some kind of retention that hopefully keeps somebody from taking it or make it more difficult.
Lieutenant, the purpose for that is what we were just talking about. There's always a gun in every.
Yes, sir. To try and make it hopefully a little more difficult for somebody to get it from you if it does come unsnapped. But to draw that holster, what you do is you would put your finger on the snap. You would undo that snap, and then the way that particular holster worked, the locking mechanism's inside. The only way to unlock the weapon is to rock it forward. So you undo the snap, you rock the weapon forward in the holster, then you draw the weapon out of the holster. Versus, to compare it to what we have now, it's a whole different holster. It's made of a different material, different locking mechanism and everything. All the internal locking are buttons up top. So the holster, the gun comes in and out, it locks in on its own, and it's nothing but a couple buttons that you manipulate, versus having to actually move the position of the whole weapon.
Under the old holster, decision to shoot, to shot and fire of 1.49 or 1.5 seconds, how does that fit into the action of a police officer using lethal force?
As far as the retention holsters are,
In terms of the decision to fight, and there's been a lot of discussion about distance, right? 17, 18 feet, you and I are apart now. But from the policeman's mind, when they're touching the suspect with what they could be disabled, so when there's actually contact, there's physical touching, and the decision is made in 1.5 seconds, is that an average time? How does that fit into your training and experience?
Or
I
what-
believe this goes beyond his expertise. See a psychologist.
Are you a psychologist?
I am not a psychologist.
Are you a firearms trainer?
Yes, sir.
How about a 1.49 or 1.5 second delay from decision to shot in terms of unholstering the weapon?
That's,
Where is that?
that's good for a retention holster. Like I said, the holster is designed to lock the weapon in, so to get all that released and undone is a good time.
Kindly answer any questions the prosecution may.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break now. Please go to the jury room. Do not discuss the case. And we'll take about 10 minutes. Please do not discuss your testimony with anyone.